On the recording of this meeting, this is recorded, and I will turn this off to turn this over to Township Administrator Vicki Earhart.
Good afternoon. We appreciate you joining us for this special meeting of the Board of Anderson Township Trustees. The purpose of this meeting is strictly related to the motor vehicle license tax that is being considered. Due to the declared state of emergency in the state of Ohio and in the nation and the township, this meeting is being held virtually by phone or through the computer where you can connect visually as well. Again, the meeting is to accept public comment on the question of levying an annual motor vehicle license tax pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 4504.181. The board will accept public comments during this meeting after initial introductions. And as Mr. Sievers said, we ask that you mute your phones and only unmute if speaking. If you're going to speak, we ask that you speak directly into the microphone as opposed to using the speaker feature on your cell phones. It does help reduce some of the background and feedback noise. We appreciate you attending again, and at this point, I'm going to turn the proceedings over to Trustee Chair Josh Girth.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Ms. Earhart. We're going to call to order this meeting and do so by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I would move to adopt today's agenda.
So moved.
Second. Mr. Pappas?
Yes.
Mrs. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Girth?
Yes, as this is a special hearing, as Ms. Earhart said, let's get down to the topic at hand, and we'll do that by our administrator, Vicki Earhart, reading an opening statement for this hearing.
Thank you. This is the first of two public hearings that are required by statute. The advertisement was placed in the Cincinnati Enquirer as a legal ad. It's also been advertised on our website, www.andersontownship.org. I want to start off by explaining a little bit about our Public Works Department, what their function is, what they do for us, number of employees, etc. Public Works is responsible for the maintenance of 122 miles of township roadway, which is more than any other township in Hamilton County. Maintenance and repair responsibilities include curbs, sidewalks, storm sewers, and snow removal, which we are very proud of, and our residents love the snow removal. We have over 90 miles of sidewalk that are Public Works maintained. And that happened in 2008 when the Board of Trustees accepted all sidewalks into the Anderson Trails program. Prior to that, those sidewalks and subdivision streets were maintained by the homeowner. They were required to be maintained by the homeowners. So the board took that over to remove that burden from the property owners. Public Works also maintains township fleet, which includes the snow plows, the dump trucks, those types of vehicles, all of our staff vehicles. They do have a maintenance responsibility for fire and rescue equipment as well, but that is funded out of the Fire and Rescue Department, not Public Works budget. In addition, our crews maintain 4 cemeteries in the township. Looking to the financial picture, the 2020 budget for Public Works is $4.6 million. Now, part of that, the majority of it, $2.9 million, covers personnel costs. There are 11 full-time employees in the Public Works Department, and we also have 2 seasonal part-time snowplow operators that are called in as needed. With that budget, it not only funds personnel, but supplies and materials such as salt, aggregate, tools and equipment, the snowplows themselves, chains, other types of tools that are needed on the job, fuel for the vehicles, property and casualty insurance, tree trimming in the right-of-way, utilities for the Public Works garage, repairs for that facility, cemetery maintenance, and Anderson Trails construction and repair. $1.7 million is coming directly from the TIF budget. This is something that the board instituted. We sought that through legislation to use those TIF dollars for road maintenance and repair. So for example, the paving rejuvenator that is placed, replacement of culvert pipes, that type of thing can be funded from our 1994 TIF, which takes some of the burden off the road and bridge levy. So combined, the 2.9 million for the Public Works budget, the 1.7 million in TIF is what equals a $4.6 million budget for Public Works during 2020. On the revenue side, we are looking, excluding the TIF, we're looking at about $1.7 million. So you can see with a $2.9 million budget and 1.7 million in revenue, we have a bit of a shortfall. The revenue comes from our general fund, where we're transferring $200,000 out of the general fund to help Public Works. We get about $27,000 for cemetery maintenance. We have what is called an additional motor vehicle tax. And essentially what that is a 5% share of the state tax of auto registrations. And it's based on road mileage. So for Anderson Township, that means about $45,800 a year in revenue. We have the gasoline tax, which we're estimating $250,000 in revenue. That may be less due to the lack of travel that's going on because of the pandemic right now. We also have a 1 mil road and bridge levy that was approved by voters in 1998. That is the last levy that we've had for road and bridge. That generates about $850,000 a year, and $100,000 of that for the voter approval is dedicated toward Anderson Trails. Again, this was the last levy. It was 22 years ago, and in 22 years ago, we had 110 miles of township roadway. That's obviously increased to 122 miles today, which is about a 10.9% increase. The other fund that we have available is motor vehicle license fee, which is a $5 registration on vehicles. That is all vehicles, commercial and passenger vehicles. That was enacted, we're guessing, I've been talking to our fiscal officer this morning, and we think that's about 30 years old. That's been on the books for quite some time, and that generates about $320,000 a year. What brought us to this meeting in this public hearing today is the 133rd General Assembly, the Ohio General Assembly, in House Bill 62, their transportation bill. They included an opportunity for townships and municipalities to capture another $5 per license. This is to help offset a lot of the revenue reductions that townships in particular have received over the years due to lack of tangible personal property, estate tax, all of the other cuts that were made, cuts in the local government fund. So this permissive tax is an annual motor vehicle license tax for up to $5 per motor vehicle that's registered within the unincorporated territory of the township. That can be used, those dollars can be used for paying for construction, reconstruction, improvement, maintenance, and repair of township roads, bridges, and culverts, purchasing and erecting traffic signs, markers, lights, signals, purchasing road machinery and equipment, planning, constructing, and maintaining suitable buildings to house that equipment, paying for railroad crossings, and we do have one of those in the township, one or two, and supplementing revenue that's already appropriated for that purpose. The passage of this or consideration of this requires the board to hold 2 public hearings. Again, this is the first of 2 public hearings. The second will be on May 21st at 6 p.m. It is likely that that meeting will be held telephonically and virtually as well. We do have information about that hearing posted on our website. And we'll keep that updated as we get closer to the 21st. Again, we've provided the appropriate notice in the newspaper with the legal ads as required by law. And essentially this additional tax, staff are estimating that it will generate about $225,000 a year for public works operations. We're hoping that this will help stave off the need for a road levy or give us one more tool to perhaps, if the board considers a levy in the future, to lessen the amount of the millage. The board has already given staff direction on other things that they wish us to look at to try to make up the shortfall between our projected revenue and our projected budget for Public Works Department. So at this point, unless the board has any questions, I'll turn it back over to Chair Josh Girth.
Thank you, Ms. Earhart. I will start off by saying that while we referred to this as an additional tax in terms of addition to the motor vehicle license fee, I want to make sure that anyone on here and, well, quite honestly, anybody, that our residents know this is not an additional tax. This is an alternative source of revenue that we are considering to offset the shortfalls of this particular fund and honestly any other funds. As many know, we get almost 100% of our revenue from property tax. And as anyone who's lived in Anderson Township over the last few years, we have had increases in those property taxes. And this board has come, has I think done a good job of trying to figure out what and how else we can run the Anderson Township government and provide the exemplary services that we do without going to the property tax bucket every time. And the state legislature has given us this ability to collect this fee. And as Ms. Earhart mentioned, we estimate another roughly $250,000, maybe a little shy of that. And if we decide to do this, this will certainly be part of the discussion of what and how this offsets our needs in the future, whether it's from a levy or any other sources of income. So I want to make sure that that's clear. We're not asking for an additional tax. I mean, we are specifically on the motor vehicles, but this would offset our shortfalls in the budget overall. So we're just trying to think of alternative ways that we can do this without keep having to go back to the voters, the residents for property tax increases. Andrew, Dee, any other comments before we go into the public comment portion?
I'll start, Dee. Well, there you go.
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Go ahead. Just the fact, I think Mrs. Earhart said it's 22 years. Is that the last time? Is that what you said, 22 years?
Yes, 1998.
Right. That's obviously a long time. Or as you said, the number was increased by the road mileage or whatever we call it is increased by 10%. So, I mean, our costs obviously have increased over the past 22 years. So I want people to keep that in mind as they are making their comments. Go ahead, Andrew.
All I'd like to add is, as we all know, as Dee said, it's our costs have gone up 22 years is a long time for a levy. And we're looking for ways that, we could lessen the blow to putting a tax levy on the ballot. I mean, if you average, let's say that a household here in Anderson has 3 cars, you're looking at an additional $15 a year for your license fee. I mean, that's a very small, I'm not a pro-tax guy by any stretch of the imagination, but we're looking for ways to limit the amount of taxes we're coming to you for. And a license fee, $15 a year, I think if it's 3 cars, if you have 2 cars, obviously it's $10, but it's a very minimal way of coming to the taxpayers for additional sources of revenue for roads than a totally new or increased levy for this fund. So just keep that in mind. But, you know, obviously this is a public hearing. We appreciate any and all comments, and we'll answer them to the best of our abilities.
Ken Dietz, any comments from the Fiscal Office?
Yes, one comment is the 1 mil levy that was passed back in before 2000 is a 1 mil levy. It generates the same amount of dollars, but is no longer at 1 mil. It's a lot more like 0.67 mils because of the reduction due to the increase in assessed values since that time. So we're basically collecting the same amount of dollars because the amount of the levy was reduced. The other thing I would say, the 1.7 million that we are now permitted to spend out of TIF for paving, rejuvenating curb, replacement of culvert pipes and all that, that is not considered in the revenue under the budget and revenue numbers because that's the money that we have on hand, and it's basically a pass-through from the TIF fund, and it goes into the budget, and we do not include that in revenue for the road and bridge. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. And I want to reiterate too what Ms. Earhart said earlier about what this board, our plan is to approach the state legislator again and see if we can't get the restrictions on these TIF funds that we have lifted so that we can appropriate some of those dollars into personnel costs. That by and large, folks, would solve our problem here. So we are not giving up on that, but as anyone knows, going to the state to get things done is not always the easiest nor the quickest thing. But we promise that is one of the actions, one of the directions we're going to take before we go and come out with another levy. So with that being said, I will, unless there's any other questions or comments for anyone, I will go ahead and open the public comment for our section of this hearing. So any individuals on this call who wish to address the board should state their name and address for the record. Please make your points as clear and concise as possible, as we will be taking notes and recording this. Limit those comments to 3 minutes. Those comments or those minutes may not be yielded to anyone else, and all comments will be directed to the Board of Township Trustees. So at this time, if anyone would like to chime in, please remember to state your name and address, and you may do so at this time. Again, we are in the public commentary portion of this public hearing, so anyone that would like to speak any commentary regarding this for or against is welcome to do so at this time.
I would like to speak, please.
Please go ahead and identify your name and address and go ahead with your comments.
This is Tim Curry, 6954 Patterson Road. I have to take a dispute a little bit with calling this not a tax. It's a tax. Any other way would be calling black by saying it's an absence of color, which is truly the meaning of black. But this is a tax. I don't want to say, no, it shouldn't be done. I think we have expenses that have gone up and everything else. But please don't try to whitewash this and say it's an alternative revenue stream. Whatever you call it, it's a tax that cannot be avoided once it's passed. It's a tax based on the number of cars in the parking lot of your home. And that's all there is to it. So I am for it. I understand costs have gone up. I'm a contractor in the township, and I have been for 35 years. And my costs certainly have gone up, but please just don't try to whitewash it. That's all. And I'm finished.
Thanks, Tim. And if I gave any impression that this was not a tax, I apologize. Yes, it is very much a tax. Anybody else?
Craig Best. Sure can. Can you hear me?
Hey, Craig, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, 785 8 Mile Road. Ex-employee of the township. And I just don't see where this is a big issue. You know, all the years on a levy that we put the public works through and working with these individuals, working with the township, and seeing how the township always tries to do the best with the money. And I know, because when I would put in for purchase requisitions, we'd have fight long and hard to get things. So we do appreciate that, because as a resident of this township, I always knew that every thought was given behind every request. Yes, it is a tax. Do we need more taxes now? No. But the costs are going up. There's certainly going to be a shortfall with the pandemic. We see it in other things. We see it in businesses. But I know 2 cars, $10 a year. I don't think I'm going to go broke over that. So I would wholly like to support this, that it's a good idea. It's certainly a way to work out some of the money until you can try to find out if other things can be done at the state level. That's all I got.
Thank you, Craig. Anyone else?
Yes, this is Steve. Can you hear me?
Steve, yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So Steve Kowski, 6734 Mile. I just have 2 comments. I think throughout the whole conversation so far, we've talked about why we need more money, but we haven't talked about any cost savings that the township is currently working on to reduce the cost, instead of just giving up that the costs are increasing. And I think the timing of this is pretty bad, that we're going to start taxing our citizens when people are struggling to put food on the table, pay the rent, mortgage of their house, and even pay for the car that you now want to tax without going through a vote. So I just, whether timing is your fault or not, I think the timing of these hearings and when the tax is going to get implemented is a very bad look for our township, that we want to tax the people that are struggling so bad right now, trying to figure out how to put food on the table. Some of us are more fortunate than others, but there's plenty of people in our township that are on fixed incomes or no income at all that can't afford. Yes, for some people, $10 may not be a lot, but if you're a mother with a single mother trying to put food on the table, $10 can be multiple meals that now all of a sudden get taken away. I yield back.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else? Going once. Going twice. Okay, we'll close the public commentary portion of this hearing. Vicki, I don't know if maybe if you want to address any of the cost saving things, you're welcome to do that now, or I think, well, however you want to do it. But it's a good question. I mean, we certainly have, and you guys certainly have done a lot over the last few years to save money in our budget. And so if you want to speak to that, you're welcome to do so.
Sure, I appreciate that. And I also want to address the timing question as well. This legislation that allowed the board to take this action or consider taking this action went into effect last year. And we have taken time to review it, to consider whether or not it's something we should pursue. So the board could have enacted this, like I said, last year. And one could say our timing is great, and one could say our timing is awful, because if we had enacted it last year, it might have been a different story. But the board did want to take its time and look into this. If the tax is approved by the board, it has to be filed by July 1st with the county, and it won't take effect until 2021. So this would not be for this year. And I realize, you know, a lot of the struggles that people were going through may last for years, not just this 2020 season. So I appreciate that and understand. As far as the cuts, and we can give you more details at the next public hearing, which is on the 21st. But some of the things that we have done over the years, we have went through an entire exercise of should road maintenance get bigger or should it get smaller? And by bigger would have meant adding staff, adding vehicles, adding space to store those types of things. We elected to go smaller. And the reason we went smaller is because we could contract some of those services out. We could also eliminate some of the things that we had been asked to do. For example, a lot of residents wanted us to pick up leaves and do some waste hauling as far as leaves and debris. We do it during storms, but other than that, that is not a service. We did an analysis and determined it was too costly. We do things to keep our costs low by, for example, borrowing equipment from other townships. Columbia Township has been outstanding at letting us borrow their street sweeper, so we use that instead of owning our own. We have also worked with other townships collaboratively to have a salt conveyor rather than having our own, which is cheaper to just borrow it and share equipment. We have also worked with the legislature, because that 1.7 million that I mentioned that comes out of our TIF fund for road maintenance, prior to us working with the legislature, that came out of the road and bridge levy. So while that's not a reduction as far as a reduction in cost, we did take that out of our TIF dollars instead of going back to the voters. And I don't know if Eric Luganbuehl, our Public Works Director, is on the line or not, but you know, if he has anything to add, otherwise we will come up with a more specific list for the next public hearing.
Thanks, Vicki. It's a good idea. And again, I want to stress too that we're looking at a public works budget of $4.6 million. Our goal is to get to that budget, or we have to get to that budget. And the exercise we're going through now is to determine if it makes sense to do it in alternative ways, and I'm going to use that word again, to get there rather than just continuing to increase property tax through levies. And so the money that this would generate would certainly be factored into that cost. We're not looking to take to raise $5 million for a $4.6 million budget. So I want to stress that this is an alternative option that we're looking at to try and get to that number versus coming to the residents for another property tax levy. Or certainly not to the extent that we would if we didn't have this money coming in.
And Mr. Girth, if I may add, and one of the things that we did take on, and I mentioned it briefly, but prior to 2008, every resident had to pay for the sidewalk in front of their home. So for example, every block, I think, averaged $50 to $100 for each block to be repaired and replaced. And that money to repair those sidewalks was not included in that road levy when we passed it in 1998. We included $100,000 for Anderson Trails on an annual basis, but that was the Trails program on county roadways that connect neighborhoods. As far as the sidewalks in front of each property owner's home, we did not include funding for that in that levy. That is something that we were able to provide to our residents because the board wanted that service to be provided to our residents. And that started in 2008. So that's been on the books for a long time, which hopefully reduces some of the costs our property owners had to bear. And again, it's not a cost reduction as far as reducing the expenses of the township, but it reduced the expenses of the homeowners.
Thank you, Vicki. That's a good point. Andrew, D, Ken, anything else to add? Seeing none.
Oh, I just,
Yeah, go ahead.
that's, yeah, I do, your point is taken, Mr. Curry, it is a tax, but this would go for the people, if we do decide to do this, that are using the roads. I mean, everything else is paid for by the property owners. And so the people that are using our roads every day, they would, be incurring some more of the cost on this. So I just think that point has to be made.
I'd like to just add that, look, we appreciate all the comments that come back, and we don't do this just to get positive comments. So, Steve, appreciate your comments and take them to heart. Vicki raised a really good point that needs to be remembered by all the residents, because we do get multiple requests. When are the sidewalks going to be done here, or when are the sidewalks going to be done there? That was a prior board committed us to taking over the sidewalks, and that's something that there was never a separate levy set up for that. That was just assumed by the township. And, that puts a strain on that levy. And, again, 22 years, I'm not just stating facts here. That's a long time for a levy. And then you factor in the additional responsibilities of sidewalks here and sidewalks there. And although we do a wonderful job, our staff does a wonderful job of trying to get grants for some of those and some monies from state and federal sources for some of the projects, it doesn't cover nearly all of them. So just remember, yes, you asked a great question. What have you done for cost cutting? And I can tell you, anytime you want to go down and take a tour of the Public Works building and see how those guys really stretch our dollars by repairing equipment with scrap signs that are been damaged and repairing rather than just buying new. I've been down there. I've talked to the guys, and I love the way our staff comes up with our Public Works staff comes up with ways of fixing rather than replacing, and they really stretch our equipment to the. We get our useful life out of our equipment. I'll put it to you that way. So. Please, everybody, digest the information we've shared and keep the comments coming, because that's what this is for. And we really do appreciate and factor in all of your comments, and it does get heard. So thank you.
Okay, with that, just as a reminder, we will have another public hearing next Thursday at our regular Board of Trustees meeting starting at 5:30. I think the public hearing portion probably starts around 6. Well, it starts at 6. It will start at 6. We don't know if that'll be in person. We would like it to be in person, so but we will certainly let everybody know. Otherwise, we'll be doing it again in this format. With that, I would move to adjourn.
Mr. Girth, if I may, before you adjourn, this is Steve Severs. I'm just making a note that everyone was unmuted during the public hearing. And this is being recorded, so we will publish this to our YouTube page once that recording is complete. If anyone wishes to electronically sign in who did not speak, you may do so by either speaking your name here at the end, or you can email Molly Moorfield at Moorfield, that's MMOHRFIELD @andersontownship.org, and we can make sure that that's noted accordingly. So we want to make sure we try to capture that. We don't tell folks unless they're identified. So if anyone's on the call here would like to identify themselves, maybe they can do that before we close the meeting.
Okay.
Lisa Daly. Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm Lisa Daly and I'm here, so I just wanted to say my name.
Oh, thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Zen. I'm here as well.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Mr. Girth.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and I would move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second,
Mr. Pappas,
yes.
Mrs. Stone,
Yes.
Mr. Girth.
Yes.
Who's your buddy, Craig?
It's my granddaughter, Rory.
Hello.
Yeah, I missed that. No.